at those times because you're focused so hard on writing quality answers, writing the right answers, trying to do the very best. I know personally, whenever I get stressed, my blood glucose drops very, very quickly. Whenever I find that stress hormones make my blood glucose plummet. About 50% of us will have that. Group of people are more privileged than the other. We work in different ways. But I find that whenever I don't have hypo-awareness until my blood glucose gets down to about 2 millimoles, which is around 36 milligrams per deciliter. And I'm very aware of the fact that I have a tingling sensation in my nose, in my lips. Once I get below 2, I start to sweat quite profusely. So my back would get very wet in particular. I would become very confused. I get very sassy whenever I get down to about 2.5. That's usually when my colleagues or my family will say, just check your blood glucose and see what it's doing there. Because normally I'm fairly easy going in work anyway, or when I'm out with friends, but I'll suddenly get very, very sassy. I get quite willing to challenge people, and I wouldn't normally do that. I would just go, yeah, okay, that's fine. But whenever I get down to about 2.5, if somebody asks me to do something, I don't get quite rude. I just get very assertive in a way that I wouldn't normally. My work colleagues think that's absolutely hilarious. They're going, oh, there she is, get that girl some glucose now. And I'm going, I'm fine. I don't need any glucose. I've just decided that I'm going to be much more confident in myself. They think it's hilarious whenever they see me like that because they normally, yeah, okay, that's not a problem. I just do that for you. So it's just the way that I personally tend to work. When I get down to about 2, I lose that confidence. I lose that ability to challenge people. I actually become very overwhelmed with sadness. So there are times whenever I will burst into tears whenever I get down to about 1.82. I cannot be consoled. I just feel like I'm incredibly worthless, that I've lost any hope, that I've lost any joy. Yeah, very emotionally overwhelmed. No confidence whatsoever. No resilience. I think resilience is quite a popular word in these days, being resilient with your diabetes. And yeah, I definitely don't do resilient whenever I get down to that level. And then if my blood glucose continues to drop, so below 1.8, that's where I find it very difficult even to stand up. I lose the capacity to be able to stand. And there've been a number of occasions where my family have found me curled up on the floor or curled up in the kitchen, curled up in a very small space, because I felt so overwhelmed, so unsafe. My perception of what is safe and what isn't safe changes quite dramatically at that level as well. The very lowest I have ever gone and been conscious was about 0.6. I used to get very stressed whenever we were doing physiology and anatomy lectures at university. After one session, I remember walking from the university to the bus station, which was about 1.5 miles from the university campus. And I knew at that stage that I was low because I was starting to hallucinate. I was seeing rainbows. When I get very low, a wee figure. Ireland, everybody associates with like fairies and leprechauns. I used to say it was my wee fairy man would appear, and I would see the wee fairy man crawling on the ground in front of me. And whenever I saw him, I knew, yeah, definitely I'm low. And I went into a shop to try and buy some fruit juice to get my sugars back up again. And I burst into tears because there was too much choice. And I stood in front of the shelf with the tears rolling down my face because I couldn't decide which bottle of juice to buy. And every time I went to lift the one that was proper sugar juice, not a diet drink, I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. I thought, I can't buy that. I have diabetes. So even in the middle of a hypo, I was still thinking, I have diabetes. I can't drink that. And if somebody sees me drinking that, they're going to think that I'm being really bad and I want to have my feet amputated, or I want to go blind, or I want to lose my kidneys. It was such a really strong, powerful emotion. I did eventually manage to lift a bottle of orange juice that wasn't diet. It took me ages to work out how to be able to pay for it. I was so confused. I looked at the coins in my hand and I couldn't work out how many I actually needed to give the shopkeeper. So I think I just held out my hand and said, just take what you need. I can't remember how much this costs. As I was sobbing, and my little fairy friend is busy crawling across the top of the worktop. Not in real life, but in my head they were. And when I sat down with the juice bottle, I thought, I need to do a blood glucose now. And I say it was 0.6. And I just sobbed because I felt that I'd let everybody on my diabetes care team down. I felt I'd let my family down. I had felt I'd let my colleagues in university down. I was just in such a pit of despair at that point in time. I eventually managed to open the bottle of orange juice and started to drink it. I felt so guilty that I was treating a hypo, and I didn't want anybody to look at me. I didn't want anybody to come anywhere near me. Thankfully, nobody in the bus station actually knew me at that point in time. this is a small country of 1.8 million people. It's really, really difficult not church or from my town who were in the same bus station getting the buses at the same time. And thankfully that day there wasn't anyone, because I couldn't even have spoken to them. I was so embarrassed. And I say, in such a pit of despair that I couldn't have managed that at all. And I remember when I was sitting on the bus, I got about halfway through the bottle of orange juice, feel my blood glucose starting to come back up. And it started with a tingle in my toes. And I could feel that tingle in my toes starting to move up into my legs, into my hips, into my back. And by the time I was about 10 miles away from home, I could actually feel my fingers tingling and my sight was starting to return to normal. So my little fairy friend had disappeared. The rainbows that I was seeing every time I looked at anything had disappeared. That awful, awful sadness had eased. So by the time I got home, I was basically back to normal again, but it had taken me a good 40 minutes to go from 0.6 to, I think I was sitting about 4.3, 4.4. Whenever I got off the bus, I felt so ill. I felt so sick because the glucose in the juice had helped to kickstart that glucagon release. And I was shivering because I had sweated so much when I was so low that even, a light breeze just made me feel so cold. I felt cold from my inside out, like I was ice inside. It took forever. It felt like forever before I started to feel warm again. So even though, I'd had the sweating, I was really so bitterly, bitterly cold. I was still so embarrassed that this had happened in a really public place. And I was so thankful that I hadn't collapsed, because as I say, there've been times at home where I have literally just crumpled to the floor, almost as if I fainted. But it's not a faint. It just is where my body has gone, cannot do this anymore. So there've been a number of occasions where it's been like that. That is really very scary whenever you're on your own. And as I say, it's scary whenever you don't have those warning signs at the point where, in an ideal world, you would have those warning signs when you're about 4.5. But unfortunately, things don't always go according to plan. And even though you do try to be on the lookout for those unusual sensations, particularly in your face or in your hands or in your back, or you can't respond because you're doing something else at that time, it's awful, because I think once you go below a certain level, you don't actually realize that your blood glucose is as low as it is. And it can be very disabling, very disempowering, certainly. The lower you go, obviously, the more glucose it takes to treat that hypo. I remember another night, not long after I'd been diagnosed, we were out with friends in Belfast for food, and my blood glucose was again very, very low. I had got a regular Coca-Cola to drink to try and get my blood glucose back up again. I say when I get low, I get quite sassy and get quite focused. And this person said to me, "You can't drink that. You have diabetes and you're not allowed to drink stuff like that." I remember I stood up and I emptied the container of Coke over their head. I turned and I walked out of the restaurant. I said to my husband, "That's it. We're going. I've had enough of this person. Don't you ever be so rude to me again." Which I wouldn't have said, because I'd known this person since I was 4 years of age. But I had literally stood in a very public space and I had just emptied 500 mils of Coke over his head. And he said, "I'm going to send you the dry cleaning bill for this." And I said, "Yeah, do that, because I'm not paying it. I nearly died and you told me to stop digging the thing that was making me better." And I stormed out. And I think by the time I got back to the car, I cried because I was so embarrassed. He called round a number of weeks, months later. He hadn't realised that I'd had diabetes. I don't think I'd told him. And it was so bizarre, because I was so cross with him. I was so cross with the way that he had acted. And he thought I was just being a drama queen. But again, whenever you've got really good type 1 peers, you're able to say stuff to them and they go, "Yeah, I did that one time with this person as well. I did that on my boss in work, or I did that with a family member." And it's like, let's say the peer support's really good, because you're able to take those moments, those experiences, and share them with other people, and they totally get it, they totally understand it, whereas other people are thinking, "Stay away from the weirdo," which is lovely. It's just so good having that.
So how has your hypoglycemia unawareness affected your family, maybe?
There have been times whenever my family, actually my children and my husband, would know that I'm hypo before I do, because of the way that I start behaving, because of things that I start to say, or the way that my attitude can change very quickly to them, but it's not very quickly to me. To me, it's like, no, I'm exactly the way I was 20 minutes ago. I haven't changed at all. I think for my husband, one of the scariest times was whenever I was pregnant with our first son and I had a hypo in the bath. I was actually drowning in the bath because I'd slipped underneath the water. And in my head, hallucinations with hypos, I thought I was a little fish. So I was splashing in the bath like a little fish, doing all the things that little fish do, living under the water, breathe in water. My husband heard me choking. He heard the bath water splashing, and he came into the bathroom and took the plug out, pulled me up from underneath the water by my hair, and got me a glucagon injection. So I don't think he's ever quite recovered from that. For my sons, the most recent one would have been with my eldest son. I came home from work. My blood glucose had been normal when I'd left. By the time I got home, it didn't feel right. I just felt like I was, again, very tired. It'd been quite a busy day in work, and I had had a number of sad moments in work. And I thought that all of that had just come to a head, and that everything sad that I had dealt with that day had suddenly erupted, as it can do. But my son looked at me and he said, "Are you okay?" So apparently whenever I go hypo, I become very pale, very, very, like, no pink in my face at all. And under my eyes becomes very, very dark, very shadowed. And I said, no, I'm fine. I just have had a really busy day in work. I'll make you a cup of tea. So he made me a cup of tea and put sugar into it. And he gave me a biscuit. And he said, sit down. I went, oh, I'm not going to have the biscuit. I feel okay. And he went, I don't think you are. Let's check your blood glucose. And he knew, because I was starting to do like a lot of repetitive behaviors to try and ground me. So whenever I checked my blood glucose, yeah, I was 1.3. So I had driven home with my blood glucose below 5. And that's a really bad thing to do. But he had recognized straight away. He knew from that. I think they've always been very good about picking up whenever I'm having a hypo. And whenever the boys were smaller, when they were like age 5, age 6, they would literally just appear with a hypo stop gel or with a carton of apple juice or with the biscuit for me and say, I think you need that, Mummy. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. And they'd be like, no, I think you do. Have that, and then we'll check your blood glucose. So yeah, they've been very well trained, my little hypo hounds here at home.
Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, yeah, now they're really good. Puzzled at times, they get confused, they don't even know. I said, okay, fine. I don't think I even need you how to inject. So if my blood sugars are low, then that means I don't need insulin. So then I said, okay, fine. When you see these things happen, maybe you might have to do this. But maybe I was a bit kind of a person. I would eat so much to avoid the hypos, because most of the times I was trained in class or I'll be at work. So I try to avoid all those. He's not doing enough because of his blood sugar. So I didn't want people to blame me to say so many things. So I try not to. Therefore, this is really incredible. And I'm glad that when you had your first hypo, you were at school, you were not driving on your own. Probably you could have gotten into the car, started driving. Oh, we wouldn't know what would have happened. But then, thank you so much. And I know that the world is going to love the story if they hear this podcast. Maybe if you can share with us an experience or maybe a time when you get a diabetes patient, maybe as a midwife, during labor, that kind of a thing. Maybe you had the hypo.
Well, yeah, quite often our women with type 1 diabetes, obviously labor's called labor because it's hard work. It's not called labor because it's a walk in the park. Quite often women will drop their blood glucose because the blood glucose targets for pregnancy are so much lower as well. They lose their hypo-awareness because their body's working so hard, because the uterine muscle is doing so much work trying to get the baby ready for birth. Blood glucose drops very quickly as well. We would check women's blood glucose every half hour, which is more often than most of the guidelines recommend. But I think it's because our staff have such a fear of women in labour having hypos in case anything awful happens to them or their babies. But one woman, very recently, actually last week, I was working in the antenatal clinic, and a lady with type 1 diabetes had a hypo while she was sitting waiting to be seen by the endocrine doctors and the dietitian. She became very pale. She became very agitated. The girls in the clinic shouted for me to come and give a hand because they're like, you know what to do. We don't know what to do with people who have diabetes. I keep going, girls, you do know what to do. You have to keep sorting me out in work whenever I have hypos. Pretend that it's me. And they went, yeah, but we know what to do with you. And I was going, okay, fine. So suddenly I was left in charge of the woman who was having a hypo in the corridor. So I went over, just asked her if she was able to check her blood glucose. She didn't quite understand what I was asking her to do. So I said to the girls, right, can you please go and get biscuits? Can you go and get this lady a cup of tea? The lady, do you have any hypo treats with you in your bag? She had a little pot of fruit that her daughter had given her before she left the house. So she started to eat. And I said, okay, now if you eat your grape, because grapes a really high sugar food. Are you able to chew okay? So she was, and she was able to have some grape. But she was like me whenever I get hypo, and she was so slow, and she was picking out which grape she liked the look of most, and which one was the right size, and which one was the right shade of green. And I thought, that is so funny. That's what I do as well. And I know that I have preferred, I eat what I like first, and then I work my way down the other things. And I thought, this is hilarious. But I couldn't laugh because I was looking after her as a healthcare professional. And I thought, oh, I'm so glad to see somebody else